that. Just a bit more of a flavour in terms of convenience stores. We do see ourselves as an exemplar of flexible, local, secure working. 98% of colleagues have a contract. With us, we use zero hours contracts. We use very, very little. About over a third of our colleagues walk to work. We are the ultimate local flexible employer, and most requests of flexible working, whether in a formal framework and legislative framework or not, are agreed to, because if you have good people, you want to keep them in the business, you want to accommodate what are usually other responsibilities they have, which are often about care for children or for older relatives. In terms of the specific point you asked about, talking about probationary periods and so on, and those early rights, 84% of people who work in our sector have been there for more than 1 year, and most people who've been there for that period of time stay on. Half of people working in our sector have been there for more than 5 years. So actually, we have a longevity of employment. But there's a spike of people who move on quite quickly because it's not right for them, and it might be seasonality, of course, that could cause that. But I think there is a particular challenge when we're talking about encouraging our members, as we do, to look at bringing in people from maybe typically underutilised backgrounds, whether that's care experienced people, ex-forces, ex-offenders. And we produced a document on behalf of the Retail Sector Council last year, looking at those opportunities for those people. And I think that, but for everyone starting the business, there is always a chance it just doesn't work out. It just doesn't transpire that is the job for them. And so sensible probationary periods, I don't think actually had to be too long, but sensible probationary periods to allow that to play out without undue risk to the employer. Because the final point I'd make in response to your question is that in an independent business in particular, and we represent some large businesses as well, but 71% of convenience stores are independent operated. The person running the business is the finance director, the buying director, the marketing director, the operations director, and the HR director. There is no specialist resource that's being called on. So additional processes to manage someone leaving the business are particularly burdensome for those smaller organisations who don't have people like Claire and her colleagues to help them through that always.
Final question from me, very briefly. There's been a lot in the media, I've seen it in my own constituency, around workers in retail, in convenience stores, facing some very unacceptable abuse, and shoplifting is particularly problematic in many places at the moment. Do you think that some of the measures in this bill are going to add to the difficulty recruiting to that sector, because people are that little bit more nervous about coming face to face with an abusive customer or shoplifter?
Probably three things. So firstly, I think those issues are becoming now a challenge in recruitment and retention of people, and I understand that from the point of view of colleagues who you go out to their families and their families aren't comfortable going to work in an environment where they can be subject to that violence with inadequate support from the police and others, and I think that's probably a generous assessment from me. There are particular provisions in this bill related to employers taking all reasonable steps around preventing harassment, and that concerns our members because, as they see it, they are the victims. Them and their colleagues together are the victims of crime, and then having to have responsibilities with 15 million customers a day use convenience stores for how those 15 million people might behave. And so that needs to be very carefully brought out in guidance and regulations as to what those reasonable steps are, because it'd be quite unfair to put further burdens on businesses who are already the victims of crime. I don't believe that the provisions in this bill would in themselves make it harder to recruit on that basis, other than what we talked about there, perhaps with some of those, particularly where there's a higher risk appointment and retailers being less comfortable making that appointment due to the difficulties of them moving that person on if it's the right thing to do. So I don't think the provision, apart from the harassment, I think is an angle on that, but I think that the provisions in the bill themselves wouldn't make markedly worse what is quite a challenging situation with recruitment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Stringer, good morning, everyone. I think, as a number of other witnesses have spoken already, you're generally supportive and positive about the impact of this bill. Do you feel that this is something that will help raise standards across the board and create that level playing field that we're trying to achieve?
As an employer, we're really pleased to see that it will level up. There's a lot of things in here that we already do. We're delighted to have really good relationships with our trade unions. the access to rights on day one from a flexibility point of view we've done for a lot of years. I do think it would be good to see that level of levelling up across, but I'll hand over to my peers here because they speak on behalf of the industry, whereas I speak on behalf of an organisation itself.
I mean, I think the answer to the question is as long as we don't end up with unintended consequences for responsible businesses. So, I think there's sorts of examples that we've already highlighted, and I'm sure we can, find some more. If the goal surely has to be to ensure that the detail of the measures is firmly targeted at the unscrupulous, and that is good for everybody because it does level the playing field and get rid of poor practices, which I think everybody here would be 110% aligned behind. But I think at the moment the risk is in certain parts of the bill and in, how, depending on, there's obviously a very open and sequenced consultation process, so really how that process, the adequacy, the collaboration, the ability of sort of unions, employers and government to work together to make sure that we don't end up with those unintended consequences is like the most critical thing. So I'm sorry to say depends, but I think the answer is depends.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I think it does depend. And just to give you a flavour of how flexibility works in our sector, a lot of changes to shift patterns are colleague to colleague, often through apps or through WhatsApp groups or whatever it might be. That's the reality of how shifts change. It's often one of the people who's working shifts is often the owner of the store themselves. So it's very much something they're doing with with those colleagues. And I think it's really important that the bill, in wanting to codify and formalise some of those rights, which I think is good, is fine, that it doesn't remove some of that flexibility and informality, which is part of what gives flexibility on both sides. And one of the reasons we have great staff retention in our sector, because people want those local jobs where they've got that flexibility, it fits in with their lives. So I think that it's really important that in framing regulations and guidance that we deal with things like how businesses can respond to late changes in availability. And often there are circumstances where completely beyond our control. There could be massive delivery disruption, for example. Extreme weather changes the realities of running a store. And so to help, and sickness as well, which we may come on to. Those factors are particularly challenging in a small store where, in a large store, if you've got 16, 17, 18 people working there, if you're one person down, that's a problem. If you've got 2 or 3 people working in a shop, if you're one person down, that's catastrophic in the context of that shift, but that shift's important to customers and important to the other colleagues and important to the business. So it's in enshrining greater flexibility, it's important we actually deliver greater flexibility rather than inhibiting the flexibility that's already really baked into the way we operate day to day.
Okay, thank you. A specific question for Claire now. You've said that a lot of the things in the bill are things that you do already. Could you expand on why these are things that you've done above and beyond your legal requirements already? Is it about improved worker well-being, retention, productivity? What are the sort of benefits that you see from taking these steps?
All of the above. So, I mean, we pride ourselves really on being as forward-thinking as we can be. There is always an affordability in there, but what we tend to do is listen very clearly to our colleagues. We work really closely with our unions as well,